Welcome to the Slog Pod, where we don't fix powerlessness with beer or yoga, but with a little perspective and a lot of side-eye.
Hey, have you ever been the only one in the room who saw a problem and there was nothing you could do about it? You couldn't stop it.
That's not frustration, that's powerlessness. It's what happens when awareness meets a wall.
And that wall isn't always external. Sometimes it's in our own heads.
So today we're talking about the feeling you don't want to admit, powerlessness. It shows up often after awareness. You see the dysfunction, you know something's broken, but you also know you can't change it.
We're not talking about dramatic powerlessness. We're talking about the slow, draining kind, the kind that creeps in at work, in our relationships, in culture, the kind that makes us question whether trying is even worth it.
So where it shows up most, maybe at work, you see your team burning out, leadership won't change. In politics, you vote, you speak up. The machine stays the same. It just keeps grinding on.
In our families,
Mm-hmm.
in family, the patterns just repeat. We play roles that we didn't necessarily choose. And as I said, in our own minds, we recognize our bad habits, but we just can't shift them. That does feel kind of powerless.
It's like watching a slow motion car crash, but where you're both the driver and the passenger. So some examples of that, quick examples. We've come up with a couple here. The overworked manager who knows what their team needs, but doesn't have the authority to provide it. That's a good example. A veteran watching the country they served fall into the same cycles. We've talked about that in previous episodes and with many of our friends. And maybe a therapist feeling helpless in a system that doesn't value deep healing.
I often think about, why does powerlessness feel so paralyzing to us? Why does it just shut us down? And I think it's because it's more than just like a lack of control. It's like an illusion of being alone in that powerlessness and how much that sucks.
The illusion of being alone.
You feel like you're all by yourself.
Sometimes I think we confuse powerlessness with helplessness, and they're not the same. Some of the core concepts we're going over today are learned helplessness. You stop trying because your past efforts have failed.
Yep.
And I think we've all felt that many times as we grind through life. Maybe internalized gaslighting. You start to believe the problem is you. And I think that's oftentimes where we all end up when we start saying, what's going on? Start questioning our own views, and maybe also moral injury, knowing what's right, but being unable to act on it.
I'm guilty.
Yeah.
I'm not guilty, susceptible, I think.
Sure. So give us some real examples.
I guess I always go back to, as an employee, I've got a toxic leadership situation going on, and I feel silenced because that toxic leadership wants to brand my dissent or my disagreement as disloyalty when I'm just trying to help.
Sure. I think that's a common one.
Yeah.
I feel like we've talked about that before, and I've felt that many times. And I'm thinking of different environments where I've had bosses tell me straight up, that's how they see it.
Yeah.
And I have to try to change their perspective and saying, what I'm bringing to you is just, I'm identifying something. That's that awareness. And instead they feel that as dissent or that disloyalty. And it's really not. I'm looking at the bigger picture going, this is our goal. This isn't disloyalty at all. It's just the opposite.
I'm trying to call out what's broken so we can fix it.
Absolutely.
But when you fear that you're going to be branded as being disloyal, that has a chilling effect on.
You're seen as difficult.
Yeah. You're the problem child.
And I think that we felt that. And I think a lot of the best people feel that way, right?
I've heard a lot of people tell me they feel that way.
And I remember being in organizations where I saw clear systems failures. I presented the evidence. I offered ideas. They even went as far as to thank and say, oh, that's great. Pat me on the back, and then was completely ignored. And that's kind of the last place. I stayed for 6 months and couldn't do it anymore. That was the real damage.
And I bet you were internalizing a lot and starting to look at yourself saying, is there something wrong with me? Am I the asshole here?
Absolutely. You can only do that for so long.
Yeah. And it's all of a sudden that becomes stuck. That's your narrative now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone thinks I'm a jerk. Yeah. I think back to my working career, and I've gone into meetings and done my thing, and I've walked out. And in that meeting, I could just tell by what was discussed, the decisions that were made, that we're going to fail. That was not a good conversation. Something's broken about that decision. And then I still had to help make it happen. Even though I'd said my piece, I'd given my feedback, I tried to get things to improve. And I was like, yeah, no one's going to listen, or they clearly didn't hear me. And I'm still going to have to go back out there and try to make it happen. And that made me feel really powerless.
That sounds like a good description of that powerlessness.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's systems oriented.
Yeah. Well, what you're doing is you're essentially watching the system protect itself from the truth.
Incredible. Yeah. It's a lot of what we've talked about. A decision was made, or a belief was come to, or an action was taken.
Yeah.
And they're going to drive it into the ground, even if it looks like it's not working.
So what do you do when you feel that powerlessness?
Yeah.
I think that's what we want to get to, is what can we do about it?
Well, that's a tough one. It's not a silver lining TED Talk moment.
No, this is going to suck.
It's, as we ask people to get into the slog, I think that's some of that real reflection, that realism, rather than just toxic positivity, as we've talked about before, or running ideas into the ground. So I think one of the first things that we can do is name it. I know I like to say it when I feel powerless, to bring it up, because that powerlessness thrives in silence, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I think that's a good starting point. And I often do that in therapy, and I've said this before, is to just name things, name what's going on, or to say, I feel powerless.
Say it out loud.
Yeah, I don't have control. To find, maybe step 2 being finding your influence, where your sphere of influence is, what you have power over. It's never everything, but it's also not the opposite of that, which is nothing. We can control some things.
Okay.
So maybe we take it on in what is in our influence as much as possible. I don't know that that's enough, but it's sure a starting point.
Sure. And I miss that step a lot, because it's the all or nothing thinking, that black and white. Well, if they didn't take my idea, then nothing's ever going to work. That's probably not true.
And I also think, as we're going through this, and maybe the next steps being, I think we brought up gaslighting, meaning you start to question yourself. So I think the next step might be to just not self-blame.
Don't create that narrative that I'm the problem.
Yes. I looking back at my background and the different places I worked, that constantly runs into my mind. That, am I seeing this wrong? I am seeing this wrong. Or it's constant. It's not healthy. In the end, I'm constantly going, I must be the problem. And it's not. It's that protection of that belief or decision that was made. I think that's the problem oftentimes.
For me, I think when we start choosing to take on things or to demonstrate small acts of integrity, such as refusal, reflection, reframing, and trying to encourage others to do that. That's me trying to express what I think is right.
Acts of integrity.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think it does. So I'm trying to put it in my therapeutic mind.
Of course you are.
And I think that's, as you say, refusal, reflection, reframing. I think it is to ask those questions. Start asking the questions and see where it goes. And that is integrity. It's asking those questions. What's going on? Why do I feel this way? What's the origin of this? Should that be the origin? And on and on and on.
Yeah. It's like I used to tell my kid when she'd get upset when she was really young, and just emotions are coming out. And this is before she had developed the ability to use language. I think we have to think of ourselves as children who haven't quite developed that and start doing that. We have to build our language skills. Sometimes the first power that we can regain is just what you said, the ability to say it out loud, to describe what's happening, to ask the questions, to help other people question that. And say, maybe we do need to look at this another way. Maybe we can reframe this. And saying it. I used to tell my kid, use your words. We need to use our words.
Interesting. Yeah, I think as I think of this as a therapeutic process, of course, you don't fix it. In therapy, I don't fix things, but I'm not going to allow people to pretend things are fine, or to reinforce a belief that's maladaptive or distorted. That is the power. the second we do, that's the beginning. That's that catalyst for moving on, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. And sometimes, like, you just have to understand that the only action you're really going to be able to have
Mm-hmm.
in terms of reclaiming some of that power is just not, like you said, not gaslighting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Don't make yourself the bad guy here. You're probably not the bad guy if you're really trying to help and you're really trying to be honest.
If you're offering up that, a different idea or just identifying the problem. We've talked about identifying that you're having a poor outcome.
Yeah.
And that's part of that language I think you're talking about, is identifying that poor outcome and being able to say it. And I think too, as we're talking about this, and I'm trying to put myself in that position that I've been in many times where I have identified a problem and I'm having a tough time saying that to people. If I put it in that therapeutic mindset, I don't say it to people, I ask it of people.
Mm.
Following me?
Yeah.
So it's more of a, is this happening? Because it allows them to find it also on their own rather than me stating the problem and shoving it down their throat and saying, you need to accept this as problem. They have to identify also that belief might be problematic or that decision was
You're
problematic.
taking the edge off a little bit by asking the question.
Right.
Maybe they see you a little bit less as being that disloyal dissenter problem child.
Yeah. To me, and I think there's a lot of tact in that,
Sure.
just asking the question. So
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah. So we're not powerless.
Mhm.
Power's on a spectrum. There are things we can do that even though it's not, we got our way, or
Mhm.
everyone said, oh, you're right, this is broken, it's not going to work, we should start over.
Mhm.
We have some ways to start reclaiming that power. But I think what we can agree on is that we oftentimes get overextended,
Mhm.
maybe even overinformed. But here's the key: undersupported. And that for me is what sucks the most, is when I feel like I'm the only one who's seeing it and no one else is seeing it that way or even hearing me. That lack of support is where that isolation and where that powerlessness wants to hang out in the silence.
Sure. And I think that's where we're going down the road of, as you talk about undersupported, now you got me thinking systems again, and those teams that you're in and departments you're in, and it needs to be supported. We need to be supported. Powerlessness is real, but it's not the end of your story. And those systems can help pull you out of it and the entire system out of it. It's the part where the story pauses, really. That narrative that you're saying pauses, or the narrative that your organization is putting out pauses, and you decide what's still yours to hold or yours to change.
Yeah.
Correct?
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about ending your story too. And I think that goes within organizations as we're talking about seeing the powerlessness. The end of that and the remedy is oftentimes that narrative for change starts with how you see it, what you're saying to yourself, what you're saying to your teams, what you're saying to those systems. And that changes the whole story. But it starts off slowly. It starts off with questions, and we go from there. Isn't that how that works? At least I'd hope so. But that powerlessness has been underlying current throughout much of my adult life, I think.
So what's our call to action to people who get what we're saying here about the powerlessness and have felt that?
It's probably several things. It starts with sharing with someone that you've hit that wall, that there's an identification. And that starts then the second you share it with someone, you've entered a system. As you just talked about, trying to get that feedback from somebody or including someone on a team or whatever that is. But I think sharing it with someone, that you're starting a process. You're starting a new cognition, a new thought, a new system-oriented thought.
And you're not doing it alone at that point because you're recruiting someone else.
Yes.
You're inviting them into that process.
You're inviting them to even analyze that.
Mm-hmm.
As you are even questioning the poor outcome or outcomes that were derived from a decision or the way things work or whatever that is, a belief, you're asking them also to question it. And I think that is a great starting point, or a starting point for action.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. What would be next?
We should probably, engage more with people who are listening to this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I bet people have other ideas too. There may be other ways that they're reclaiming some of that power or taking that step that we haven't identified.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
So if you're listening and you're thinking about what we've been discussing and you have something to share that would be helpful to others, send it to us. Send us an email. Leave a comment. We'd be happy to share that with others too.
Sure. So get out of those systems, that your organizational systems or whatever that is, or even the family, if that's the case, or whatever that is, to seek others and remember you're not alone.
Not alone.
And ask those questions. Am I seeing this correctly? Am I seeing all the information? Is it a poor outcome? How can I take it to someone if it is? You're right. I like this.
Yeah.
I like where we're going.
Let's start taking the power back. Let's stop telling ourselves that we're the problem. We can rewrite that narrative and it's continuous.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I like that. I feel empowered already.
Good. Well, I'm glad I could empower you.
You did.
And you empower me.
I think this is a very common occurrence in every organization I've been in, family systems, any structures I've ever been in, just life in general. You just generally feel that powerlessness, and I hate it. I think it's a very common distortion. And it's not that it doesn't exist, because I do have control, and to a certain extent, and I know that I constantly need to tell myself that I do have some control, my sphere of influence, and that I can go to others. I can ask others.
You're not alone.
And I can be accepting of what they tell me.
Right.
Or I can weigh it next to what I'm seeing as a poor outcome or the evidence there, correct?
I sure hope so.
Maybe. So with that said, it ends with that changing of the narrative and changing of belief, changing of cognitions and decisions as we talk about organizations. I love that. I love when people are right back to fluid thought.
You have to be fluid and flexible in how you're thinking about it in order to take just those initial steps that we identified. Because otherwise you're just going to stay stuck. And staying stuck in silence and feeling helpless.
Yeah. No fun.
Not healthy.
Yeah. Not healthy, period.
Yeah. Let's write a better story together. Continue the conversation. Like, share, subscribe. Really appreciate everyone who's supporting us and listening to us and sharing with us.
Yeah. admin@theslogco.com. If you want to reach out to us, and thanks for listening.
See you next time.
Cheers.